Get strong.
Hello there, and welcome back for another live build. Had a few days off, nice Easter weekend break, barbecues and homemade stone-baked pizza and the like. I hope you had a good weekend too. So, in this build we're going to set up the initial structure. We might get into automation depending on time for a building construction management setup. So we'll have companies will be of different types. Some would own properties, others would be subcontractors, depending on suppliers, depending on what they are. And then obviously we have properties. These could be domestic or commercial again. And then we have projects relating to those properties. So they could be the actual build of the properties, complete refurbs, extensions, kitchens, bathrooms, whatever those are. So we'll set up that management. So let's just have a look at that as an overview quickly. And I'm on the wrong page. So here we go. So we've got contacts. These are always our human beings in Mercanta. And then we have our data object types we're going to construct, which would be companies, properties, and projects. And then we've got our relationships. So clients, key contacts, sales, project manager, lead carpenter. We may have others, but those are our initial ones, just for this example. And then, as you may well know by now, we have these relationships can then link contacts to one or more data object type in this instance. So a key contact could be the key contact on a property and a project, and of course could be just the property or just the project depending on how it works. Sales again can be connected to the different things. So that gets quite complicated quite quickly if you're trying to just manage it with standard sort of contact-centric CRM. And then we also have the complexity that companies would have relationships to properties. The companies can own the properties, they can be subcontractors or suppliers to those properties or management companies on those properties. And then of course the properties have relationships with projects, and the companies can also have relationships with projects. So that can get quite chaotic very quickly if you don't have the right stuff in place to manage this with, which is what Mercanta is here to do. So I didn't try to construct a slide that shows how the relationships between contacts and data object types and the data object types themselves map over, because that would just be spaghetti and not all that useful. So let's get into Mercanta and look at how we are going to build this. So I'll just switch over here. You should be able to see my screen. And then I am going to go over here. Yeah, that's good for me. So I've just got a spreadsheet with all the details of the different data object types. So this is a blank app at the moment. So first thing we're going to go and do is go and create our object relationships to begin with. Here we have see. So let's go and add our relationships always first. I'm not going to add descriptions in here, they can be added later. For the moment I'm just going to add a list of possible relationships across the business. Quite a few to add here. And these relationships then do become available across any and all of the object types. So excuse me. Lead carpenter, company owner. Production manager. You can see, for instance, we've got lots of different people, different relationships for the home, where I could be the owner, you could be the resident. And it's good to track those things, because you could be doing the work for me, but I don't actually live in the property. So we'll have those there. So those are the starting point for all our available relationships. So now, like I said, we're going to have companies, properties, and projects as our data object types. So we'll start with our companies as the first one to build. So go into create here. And then first thing to do is to say, okay, which relationships could a contact have within, towards, or with a company? So I could be an administrator, an apprentice, for a subcontractor potentially, not a owner, company owner, yes, future owner for a home, no, general contractor, that's more for a property or a project. It could be a company type, but it's not really a person's relationship. Key contact, potentially, yes. Lead carpenter, I would be a carpenter at a company, but I'd be the lead carpenter on a particular project, so we'll leave that out for the moment. Production manager, potentially. Sales manager, salesperson. Sole owner, subcontractor, supplier, contact, not so much. So those are the ones that we will have for our data object type relationships, specifically to our companies. Okay. So then we go and we start adding our fields and our subsections and sections. So I would have here just a general info section with first subsection overview, and then we can add our different fields. So let's start with a company ID, and that's just going to be a text field, and that just means you can assign for each company a unique ID for referencing throughout the system depending on how you want that. We're going to say company name, and that's also going to be a text field, and we'll go work areas, let's just see, And then work areas is going to be a select, and supplier or subcontractor are our options. So we go for a select field, supplier, subcontractor. Excuse me. I'm also going to add in here the option of a, actually I've done that one wrong, this one should be called company type. So I'll add in here also the property owner. I won't set a default value for these for the moment, so I'll have that. Then my next field is going to be work areas. And again, I'll have a select. And check my options are quite extensive, so I'll get these up. So, administrative. Interior, terrain, exterior. And excavation and backfill concrete masonry. Plumbing, electrical, insulation, wall covering. Including flooring, excluding tile. Interior trim. painting, exterior painting, cleaning, and other. Okay, so that's our list for that field. Quite extensive. And I'll just go and no default value for the moment. Leave those as they are, and add that field. Now you could require the option to have that as a checkbox rather than a select. It just depends on whether a company needs to be able to assign to more than one of those options there. So that's just our overview. We're going to leave that there. So let's go and add here for and here we can just say these details, billing requirement. We'll call this insurance and billing. Add that in. So then our first field here will be insurance, which is just a text field. Insurance renewal date. Field. Preferred contact method. It's just going to be text for the moment. I would probably recommend having that as a drop down of phone, mobile, email, however that is. So I'm just working off the details I've got here. Then we just go billing method. Which again is set here as text in my instructions, but I would probably have it as a drop down because then I can drive automation about particular types of billing methods, rather than just free text. Billing method, billing requirement. There we go. So we can have that. Billing requirement. This one is going to be select with our options of receipt, 15 days, okay, so we add that field. Let's see what else do we have. Company started, they can be started doing the work, where's the number of jobs done, okay, so that's it. So then we'll also go and have direct contact info. I'll add that in. So this is sort of company contact information rather than any particular individual who works at the company. And that is what we have. Phone, fax, email, address. text area, so we can put that in there. And let me see what else have we got here. Address, billing method we've got, billing requirement, and insurance and billing will also add discount. And discount is just text. And then we can have additional information. Which we have, the year company was started, which we'll just set as text for the moment because it's not a full date. And then date company started doing work with. So this is again internal tracking for when the app user started work with the company or with subcontractor, number of jobs done, number, not half jobs. And lifetime value of jobs, so that'll be the total time value of jobs. And go for a decimal on that. Then let's just go and see lifetime value of the jobs. It's there. So gold stars. So I'm going to make this a whole number, and then we can add here the gold star details. So this is if the company is particularly good and you are told so, you can add this in here, and we can then increment how many gold stars they have, however that needs to be. What we're also going to do here is I'm going to add a heading above the field for company rating. And we'll then see on the interface where that comes into play, because we now have here a red flags field. And my note is that we can have red flags, and we can have how many red flags, and then we can have red flag details. So we can track their performance and highlight things that way. And then we've got one more special license, which is electrical, plumber or gas. I'll probably add that under here. Special license. And my options for the moment, I've got electrical, gas. And that field, put it with the insurance details. So that's our initial structure for our companies. We can go to our settings. So now here for our table columns is basically when you do a search for a company, what values do you want to see? So we want to see ID, name and type. Probably want to see insurance renewal date. A bit like a spreadsheet, columns, what do we want to see there and then, and then we can go for phone number or email maybe. Let's go number of jobs done, and then we can have that. So let's just stick with that for the moment, otherwise our spreadsheet gets really wide, or the table view. So we'll have that. We won't put up any of the section conditions for the moment. We don't need any of those. So I can go and create the object. And let me see any comments here. No, not at the moment. So that's how company's created. So let's just go and have a look at that. If I now go in here, you can see I now have a companies tab, and when I go to add, I now have that there with the overview information, these details, and then I've got the company rating down here. So that's that text, that headline that we put in, that we have the company rating. So that is our company created. So next up, we are going to create our properties. And let's see, let's excuse me. We'll go and do that. So let's go here, and we'll go for the object builder again. And now we're going to create our properties. And now again, for property, who can have what relationship? We can have a co-owner, we can have a future owner for a property. Then we can have an interested party, key contact, decision maker, a resident. We can have salespeople related to the property if it's going up for sale, owner, subcontractor, supplier. We can have tenant. So those are our relationship options for the moment. Go and add that, and then we go and excuse me, add our details. So again, we'll go with property. Actually, we'll go with general information. Add that, and then we can go with property overview. So we're going to have property ID, same as we have a company ID, and we'll have a project ID. We'll also generate these using automation. And we'll have a street address, which is just a single line. We'll have city, the state, province. Okay. So let me look. Jurisdiction. Okay. Then we'll go for additional. Actually, let's call these permissions. We've got a field here called jurisdiction. And we'll just put that in there for the moment. Might be different boroughs have different rules, things like that. We can have that in there. And then we can have site details. And we're going to go with entrance, location, instruction. And that is going to be text. And we'll have bathroom. I think that's a select. And our options for the bathroom are use main floor bathroom. So these are not where is the bathroom, but if you're a contractor on site for this property, what are you allowed to do or not do? Again, we won't have a default on this. Alarm code instructions. Make that a text area in case it's detailed. And then we can have parking instructions, pet instructions, and add a date. Site details, we can have parking instructions. Add that, pet instructions. Mind the dog. Okay, and then we can have dates. Here we have year built. And we'll have year built. Date is. It is a select field, and our options are roughly known, confidently known, and confidently known. Okay. Confidently. I would question this because I'm not sure what the difference is between roughly known and semi-confidently known. For me, they read as the same. But I'm working off instructions. And we then have the added date. Which I imagine is the date that it is added to the database. So again, we can auto calculate that. So let me just look. That is for properties. That's all we have there. So let's go and look at our display. Again, we're going to have the ID. We can have the address, details, the jurisdiction, and then we'll go with the added date. We'll just have those as our overview information. Again, we don't need to worry about section conditions for the moment. So let's go and create that object. And again, we can go and see we now have a properties tab, and we can add the properties with additional information. So last one we have is the project details. Now we'll just set up basic project details for the moment, but what we are going to do is back to our object builder, and we go and create projects. We can have admin, apprentice, then we can have the general contractor, interested party, key contact, lead carpenter, production manager, the resident, salespeople involved, site worker, owner there, subcontractor, supplier, and potentially tenant, because the tenant can change from the property over time. So let's go and have those. So now we are going to have just general info again, and we'll have a project overview, and then we can go in here and again go project ID. We'll have project type. Which I imagine is going to be a select, and let me just see what my options are. Not that many. So we have kitchen, bathroom, addition, basement, general interior, general exterior, deck, or other. Now again, we need to decide, is this really going to be a select field, or do we need to be able to choose multiple options? We can come and look at that. So that is there. Okay, project. So then we'll have project status. I imagine it is a select. So here we have sold. Now I think we probably want the status, because we sort of start off with the sale, but we don't really have anything pre-sale. So I'll add a couple. Not complete. I'm just going to add one here for new inquiry, and then active inquiry. So we're busy working out the deal, and in this instance I'm going to set new inquiry as the default for that. So we'll have that. Let's just have a look. Locates. What's that? Permits required. Start date, end date, survey sent. That. So that's our project status. And then we've got a. Let's go for meetings. So we've got this meeting status. We have select meeting status here. Pre-first meeting. Design fee proposed. Design fee sold. In quote. Maybe quote. proposal, provisions, hold, sold, or dead. They seem to be more opportunity stages, and we'll set pre-first meeting as our default again. So we have that, and I'm going to add a field here, meeting notes, and then text area. And you can then drive it that automatically becomes a note on the object as well if you need to. Project status we've got, and then we've got other information here. So we've got what would that be? Requirements. And it is this one. And I'll set no as the default. And then permits required. There's more options. And here we are going to permits required. And here we will set it as a checkbox so that we can choose many. No permit. Building permit. Electrical permit. Gas permit. Other permit. Okay, and no default in this instance. We'll add that in, and then we have some another one here which is called instead of planned start renovation date, and the answer is going to be yes or no. Default no, and then we will have, let's have here, if required, there's a planned start date. Must be a date. And then we'll have here our other dates. And here we will have, let's actually change that, dates and status. So we'll have start date, end date, and we've got survey sent. Gift basket sent. And we've got photo book. And again, what we can do is above this one here, we can go with the heading for follow-up. So that. Those are our fields at the moment. Project type. Yeah. And we go for our display settings again. ID, type, status, and planned start date, and meeting status and notes we'll have for the moment. We can go and create that. And now we can go back and see properties. We can move that there, go to projects, and now we have our different options there. So that gets us to that. And so we've got our data object types created now. But what I want to do is, when I look at a property, I want to be able to see, well, which company does this relate to? And the same, when I look at a project, I want to be able to see which property does that relate to, and there. So we're going to use data reference for this. So I'll go here, we go back to our object builder, and then what we're going to do is, inside projects, we are going to add a new field, and under overview we're just going to add related company, and the field type is going to be data reference, and now I can choose what of my other available fields is going to be my reference. Now in this instance we'll probably go with company name, because that's easier to quickly reference compared to company ID, and company ID will be more just for that. So I can go and add that field, and we can add this as, yeah, we'll have it at the bottom there, I think is fine, in our projects. So that is our related company for that project, but we can also add a related property. And again, we're going to go for a data reference, and in this instance we're going to go for, under our properties, we're going to go for property ID in this instance. Okay, and we go with that, so we've got those details there. So that's on our projects. I'll now be able to track which company it belongs to and which property it belongs to. So we save that, and then when I go onto properties, I also want to know which company this relates to. So we're going to add related company, and not all properties will have a related company. It just makes it easy to track when they do. So we add that there and save that. So we've added those fields in, and if I now look at my property, I then have that. Now there are no options there because I haven't added any companies to the system, and the same under project, there are no properties or companies because I haven't added any into the system as it stands at the moment. So we'll look at that. So next up we are going to just go and create the automation for setting up our company ID, our property ID, and our project ID. So those would be three different automations that will essentially do the same thing, but I'll show you how we do that. So for automation, we go to admin, and for the moment we go into the old back end. Automation. So we want field action is where we're going to start, and I think what I might need to do is just log out and back in, because I've added lots of data object types and different settings. So I'm just going to do a fresh login here, if you don't see your data objects and the like in automation or anything like that, just do a log out and back in on the old interface. We go to field actions. What we're going to create first is generate company ID, and we're going to go for companies. The action type is going to be ticket number. The relationship is going to be the key contact, because I only want this to run once for one contact. The ticket number and then the prefix. So let's say we're going to start at 1,000, and this is going to have COM dash for company, and the result field is going to be our company ID. So we save that. I'll just copy this. We are going to create the others as well. I'll just do them straight away. So we're going to go here and say generate property ID, properties, ticket number again, and key contact again. Start at 1,000, and here we are going to have property as our prefix, and we'll have property ID as our field we write the answer into, and here we're going to do generate project ID, projects, ticket number, and key contact again. Start at 1,000, prefix is going to be project, and project ID is where we're going to put the value in. Okay, so now we go to our trigger action, and we add our first one, which is generate company ID, companies, and you'll see in a moment why we need to do this. Key contact again, save that, generate property ID, which is properties, key contact, save that, and we're going to say generate project ID, projects, and again key contact, save that. So that's our trigger action. Now we go for our trigger conditions, and it's going to be if the company ID is not set. We go for companies, set it here as never. I only want this to run once, so I've got unique numbers, key contact, and I can go here and say if company ID is null. Okay, and then we can just add the others. Property ID is not set. Properties, again never, key contact, and property ID is null. And then we'll do our project. Key contact again. Project ID is null. Save that. Now, as we're working in the old interface, we need to refresh for the HTML to find all of that stuff on the next load. We go back to automation. Now I can go into my trigger actions, and here generate company ID. Under field actions, I go and select generate company ID, and I save, because that's a payload that we're putting into this trigger action. So project ID, project, and then for property ID, for property ID, don't get them mixed up. Then here we are going to say, I'm going to create this as a settings group. It's really just like a folder. It doesn't have any material effect on how the system runs, I know we're going to add 3. So company, property, and project. So here I say if the company ID is not set, then generate a company ID. If the property ID is not set, generate a property ID. And if the project ID is not set, generate a project ID. So I can save those. So that's now set up. So let's go back to my contact in this instance, and let's go and create a company. So here we're going to add a company. We don't put in an ID, we're just going to say my first company. Company type is going to be a supplier. We can decide later what's required information or not. We can also default the relationships, but it just depends on what you need for that. But I'll set that, and then I'm going to go and save that. So that we can now see I've got that there. If I go to history, we can see that automation hasn't triggered yet. You can see that I've got my notification that I've been added to a new object. So now make sure that I have the automation turned on. It looks like I do. So just wait a moment for it to pick up. There's a new company. Company ID is null. So we are going to generate that ID. In the meantime, what we will do, excuse me, let me get a drink. In the meantime, what we'll do is go and create a property to go with that company. So I'm going to add a property, and now you can see my first company is now an option in the related companies. Okay, so let's just go here for Winston Drive, then I leave the rest. Again, I manually connect to this, but you can set it as a default in the object builder depending on the requirement. You can go and save that. So let's go have a look at our company. There we can see that has now, you can see here in the history, the automation has run. We can see that the data was changed. So we have our ID has been generated there. So we go to our property, that hasn't run yet, but let's go and have a look at creating a project. We'll add a project. Project type is going to be kitchen, and we'll leave the rest as it is. Again, set me as the key contact, and we can save that. And what I forgot to do is we then have on the project related company, and the related property isn't there yet. I'll just get that to run. So let's go and see. Project has run. Property hasn't run yet. Have I got the right relationship selected? Yes. Let me review my automation. For the property, it is the key contact. Property, key contact, yes. So let's just go back here. I'll refresh that. Go to my project. My related property at the moment isn't showing because I might have selected the wrong thing. So let's just go and make sure history is fine there. I have an address, I don't have an ID yet, and that would likely be why I haven't got it in projects, because if I remember correctly, we went by property ID. Let me just see. Projects has related property, which we've set as property ID, yes. So until the property ID is generated, of course, there's not going to be an option for me. So let's just go and see here. Property ID has now been generated. So let's go and have a look at our project. We have our project ID related company, and I can say it relates to that property. Save that there. Okay. So yeah, so I think for the moment I'm going to stop it there. There's an hour of riveting TV for you. If you've got any questions, please just give me a shout, and I'd be more than happy to help. And probably carrying on this project, the next thing I'm going to do now is to review some of the fields and just make sure where perhaps select drop downs might be better as checkboxes, and look at a bit more automation we can do. So for instance, something that comes in quite handy is if we look at this property here. So let's go and do the added date before I go. So again, I go over to the automation, and what we want to do is the added date. So this property, we want to know when was this property added to our system. So what we do in that instance is we create an automation. So we go set property added date to today. So we go to properties, again key contact, and we are going to go with added date, and I'm just going to say set it to today. And we'll then pass that and set it to whatever the date is that it runs. Trigger condition is going to be, add a trigger condition. It's going to be if property added date is not set. So we go to properties. Again, I don't want that to run repeatedly. I only need it to run once. And add a date is null. Okay, so we'll just refresh that. Let's go back here, and now I'm going to add a new group called dates, and I'm going to say if the property added date is not set, then set the property added date to today. So we'll save that, and now in a little while we should see this date being updated here. So in the meantime, I'm quickly going to go back here, companies. It does make sense for the work areas, all these options, to actually be a checkbox, because they can be more than one. So I'm going to save that. Save that. So let's go and have a look at our property. Our automation hasn't run for that yet. You can always check history and see what automation has run, what fields data was changed, and what relationship changes to the property was made. Now we do have a priority, so let's go. When you make a change to a data object, it gets added to a priority automation list, so it gets processed sooner than the normal sort of service scan that goes on in the background. So you can see there that's now updated that to today's date, that it's been added. So yeah, any questions, please give me a shout, and I hope that that has been useful. And with that, I'll say goodbye, and I'll see you later.